So good evening. Good evening, Professor Pappé. Thank you very much for joining this talk. It's really a pleasure. So today we are going to discuss mostly about your last book, which is this one, so Lobbying for Zionism on Both Sides of the Atlantic, which was first published in 2024 by One World. And this book maps over a century of lobbying strategy pursued by pro-Israeli groups in both the US and the UK. Among the aims of the lobbies, to boost diplomatic and military support to Israel, but also at the same time silencing the support for Palestinian rights, often discredited as anti-Semitism. But so the first question that comes to my mind to start this conversation is, why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, well, the reason, the main trigger for writing this book was the kind of bewilderment that I had about the gap between what Israel was doing on the ground when I started researching the topic, or when I thought of writing something about Israel and its position in the world, and the gap between what it was doing and how visible it was, what it was doing, and the indifference of the political elites in the West, including in Europe, particularly in the United States and the UK, to an ongoing situation that you could only knowingly decide to ignore it. So it's not a question of, something that happened many years ago or something which is very difficult to get information about. It was in your face. And it was a very big question for me. How come at a moment in history when we know so much about the Israeli violation of the Palestinian human rights and civil rights? And mind you, it was written before October 2023. So even before October 23, the accumulation of evidence that led a very respectful human rights organization to define Israel as an apartheid state, the endless attempts to bring Israel into the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court for violations of the basic rights of the Palestinians, for committing war crimes and even crimes against humanity. And yet you had this shield of immunity. And a very exceptional case. And now, as an historian, I usually tend to believe that such a situation is rooted in the past, that there must be deeper foundation. It doesn't happen in one day. So I decided to look at how this exceptional position that Israel enjoys developed. In particular, the two countries that I knew as a historian were very important in determining what's happening on the ground in Palestine. One was Britain, of course, that in its 30 years of rule was the most important factor or actor that determined the future of Palestine. And of course, later on, it was the United States of America. And so I just decided to search for the very origin of the idea in the eyes of the Europeans in general, but particularly in the eyes of the British and the Americans. And I thought that would help me to understand this quite incredible situation that Israel enjoys such an exceptional exceptional immunity in the international world, or international system, and particularly in the United States and in Britain.
Yeah, and you mentioned that clearly this kind of a situation of immunity is rooted in the past, and that you wanted to look for the origins. And one thing that struck me in the book that you write many chapters about is that there is a sort of historical link between early Zionism in the 19th century and evangelical Christianity, especially in the United Kingdom. And then, touching also upon the US, you provide a lot of evidence of how there is this link between evangelical Christianity and Christian fundamentalism on one side and the support for Israel on the other. Can you expand a bit more on that? How strong is still this link, especially if I think about, the Trump administration nowadays? How strong is still the link?
Well, it is, first of all, it's very strong because it has been there for so many years. In fact, the evangelical Christian, not all the evangelical Christians, but those evangelical Christians who supported Israel were actually Zionists, if you want, before anyone in the Jewish community in Europe was a Zionist. So the evangelical Christian Zionism preceded Jewish Zionism. And it was a very important factor in creating an alliance that allowed the beginning of the project in Palestine. For a while, we forgot about them as being important. And then came the 1990s and this century, when we suddenly discovered that actually they were as important as the more famous lobby in America for Israel, AIPAC, and that actually throughout the years, from the beginning of the Zionist project in Palestine, and since the establishment of the State of Israel, but in particular since the 1990s, they returned to be a crucial member of that alliance, or a crucial factor in the shield of immunity that allows Israel to do what it does without international condemnation or repercussions. And it's important, many people who would read the book may be a bit suspicious about how can people really believe in what these Christian Zionists believe in. But we have to take seriously messianic ideas. Many people subscribe to them. And these people believed in the early 19th century as they believe today, that the creation of the State of Israel, or before that, what they would call the return of the Jews to the Holy Land, is part of a divine scheme that would precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, the beginning of the end of time. So it's a religious imperative for them to support Israel unconditionally, without any criticism. And because so many Americans subscribe to this dogma, a conservative account recently put it about 50 or 60 million people. I think it's much more than that. And before, there are similar groups, by the way, not only in the United States, but also in the Netherlands, in Scandinavia, and some other places that subscribe to similar ideas.
Yeah, and this is also a very important point because, sometimes people who write or talk about a pro-Israeli lobby run the risk of being labeled as anti-Semite and buying into this kind of a conspirational view of Jewish controlling the foreign policy of countries. But actually, you demonstrate that Christian evangelicals and also other Christian groups have been very much important in influencing the foreign policy. So it's clearly not just analyzing a lobby doesn't mean that clearly we are buying into this kind of, very much anti-Semitic and conspirational views. Okay, thank you. So before touching upon our other historical milestones in the book, I just want to ask something that speaks to more recent events, namely the October 7 attacks by Hamas. And after October 7, we see that many Western governments, pro-Israeli associations and individuals, they try to silence or even criminalize whoever tries to give a context to the Palestinian-Israel conflict. Anti-Semitism has become conflated with anti-Zionism following the definition of the IHRA. And we have witnessed also the repression of a pro-Palestinian protest rallies, the encampments in the US and the UK. So in your opinion, how serious has become the threat to freedom of speech?
Very much so. I think that the question of supporting the Palestinians right now, especially the people of Gaza, is a very important test for freedom of speech, freedom of research, freedom of basic civic rights. And it is very clear that what you have here is a situation by which forces, political forces, security forces within democratic states in particular, who are not happy with too many freedoms that citizens have, are using this as a pretext to curb our basic rights to express ourselves. It is directed against those who are now expressing pro-Palestinian positions, but it's beyond that, I think. We were there before. I mean, these similar anti-democratic forces within democracies were using the attacks on 9/11 in 2001 in the United States in a similar way, to convince governments to adopt draconian measures, to think about imprisoning people without trial. And this was more than just, in the case of 2001, clamping down on anyone who supports Palestine, but rather trying to show or to celebrate, so to speak, the ability to be less democratic under the false kind of slogan that this is done for national security or in a war against a terror. Now, this by itself is not enough to explain why so many people are now influenced by such a policy, and everywhere. I mean, I was myself detained in Detroit before and interrogated. Just today, I heard that Makram Mahul, the director of the Palestinian Center at Cambridge University, who came back from Paris to London, was detained by the British Secret Service for 8 hours while with his son, his 8-year-old son. It's just another, all these individual cases are terrible by themselves, but it's part of the same measures that are surprising, and I think the book might help to explain them, because not everyone who is involved in formulating policies of security and so on, putting Trump aside now and his crazy ideas of who is an enemy or not. But, let's think about the British institutions that have to determine who is a threat and who is not a threat to national security in the United Kingdom. I know some of them, and they're not all stupid or not knowledgeable and so on. But they are also affected by the lobby to the extent that they don't ask questions, they don't do their own diligent surveys about what is right and what is wrong. They'd rather kind of take the Israeli directive on this as it is. But of course, the Israeli pressure, on the other hand, would not have helped if these kinds of institutions would not have been themselves been affected by Islamophobia, Arabophobia, anti-immigrant kind of basic DNA. All of that, I think, explains the clamping on our basic freedoms in countries that broadcast themselves as the democracies of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the situation is pretty grim, and I guess especially after the war on terror, we see this kind of link between the national security state, Islamophobia, and Arabophobia. Okay, so getting a bit backward in time, let me ask you something about the pro-Zionist lobbies in British politics, and more specifically on the left. So you explain in the book that the first attempts to marry Zionism and socialism hark back to the 1920s, and many early Zionists, they approached labor because of this kind of ideological convergence. And then you write extensively about the labor government, the first one after the Second World War, and then the creation of the Labor Friends of Israel in the early 50s. So how solid has been the support of British labor to Zionism? And do you think there is still a continuity between the historical labor governments and the Starmer one now?
Well, to be honest, one should say that Zionism, apart from being a settler colonial project and believed that Jews from Europe had the right to colonize Palestine and dispossess the indigenous people of Palestine, was also at certain stages of its ideological development, hoping to create a socialist country. So it's not surprising that people who subscribe to socialism in Europe, including in Britain, show some affinity with a European society, be it a colonialist society, that employed the discourse of socialism, in fact, created one of the most, in their eyes, the most important paragon of socialism, the kibbutz, the joint collective settlement. And to be honest, in the 1930s and the 1940s, socialist movements in Europe, especially social democratic movements in Europe, were not particularly anti-colonialist. So that did not bother them that much. We have to remember the 1930s and 1940s, the British Empire is still stretched over many parts of the world and fighting fiercely and ruthlessly any anti-colonialist movement against that. Now, there was a change between 45 and 48, which is interesting in this respect. In 1945, a Labour Party came into power in the British election, headed by Clement Attlee, with its Foreign Minister Ernst Beving. Between 1945 and 1948, that particular Social Democratic Party of Britain was not as pro-Zionist as all the other Labour kind of leaderships before it. And it's sort of, I think there was a bit of a regret about the Balfour Declaration there. And there was an attempt to reconcile, which was impossible anymore, promises made to the Palestinians, promises made to the Jordanians, who were the allies of Britain, and promises made to Zionism. And they made a cock-up out of it. And not surprisingly, after 2.5 years, they decided to leave, which is the only way they could solve the problem that they did not help to solve, so to speak. But what is interesting, and that is really a puzzlement, and although I write about it in the book, I think it's worth revisiting it. Some of the people in the Conservative Party, some of the people in the more right wing in the Labour Party, after the creation of the State of Israel, are worried that a too strong pro-Israeli support by Britain would complicate relationship between Britain and the Arab states. Unfortunately, this only in few cases this was done because anybody cared about the Palestinians. But from a regional kind of perspective, they thought Britain should be a bit more restrained in its support of Israel. But it was the left of the Labour Party that became the most important lobby for Israel. Now, either they decided to still believe, although there was no proof to it anymore, that Israel is a socialist haven, or heaven rather, socialist heaven, or they were anti-Arab to the bone, and that's why the situation of the Palestinians did not disturb them in the 50s and the 60s, or they were not knowledgeable enough or caring about. It doesn't matter. The end result was that the left of the Labour Party was the most important pro-Israeli lobby in Britain, which is quite remarkable. Now, you asked in the final question, is it still today? I think something, of course, dramatically changed after 67. The rank and file and the left wing of the Labour Party became more and more Palestinians, pro-Palestinian, sorry. The leadership, especially the leadership that thought that the only chance for a Labour government to ever defeat conservatives is by moving more to the right, or at least more to the center, they felt they needed the pro-Israeli lobby and regarded Israel as an ally, thinking more like, I would say, conservative party rather than a socialist party, definitely not even a social democratic party. So, but all of it, and that's what the book claims, these positions can change,
Yeah.
and what the lobby is making sure that they don't change. There's all the time pressure. And you mentioned yourself, one way of dealing with it is weaponizing anti
Yeah.
Semitism, making sure that if you deviate from the traditional support of Britain to Israel, you will be condemned as anti Semitic.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, clearly, what it comes to mind when we talk about it are also the campaigns against the pro-Palestinian voices in the party, such as Ken Livingstone in the past, on Jeremy Corbyn more recently. And you kind of explain also in the book that clearly this was also weaponizing anti-Semitism, conflating it with anti-Zionism. And yeah, I mean, we also know that these kind of campaigns have been spread across other countries, including France. But yeah, you briefly mentioned also the Conservative Party. So the lobby was kind of close to Labour ideologically, but you also say that at some point they try to influence the Conservative Party. How did this relation unfold?
Yeah, definitely. For most of the part, I would say until the 1970s, more or less until Thatcher came to power, the lobby thought that it was better to kind of focus on one party. Now, because Labour, as I said, the left of Labour, the rank and file in Labour, became a bit more aware of what's going on in Palestine and developed a pro-Palestinian position, the lobby turned its attention to the Conservative Party and created the Conservative Friends of Israel. And that became even more powerful than Labor Friends of Israel, because at any given time, not every member of the Labor Party was member of the Labor Friends of Israel. But in case of the Conservatives, and maybe because the lobby was far more experienced by then, when it started in the 1980s and especially in the 1990s to focus on the Conservative Party, it was already very experienced. And it was very clear that on the way to the top of the party, it is very good to have the lobby on your side because of its networking, because of its connections. And that became a very powerful factor in determining, first of all, the careers of people in the party. But of course, the quid pro quo for this was quite an unconditional support by the Conservative Party to Israel. And that's when you really had a situation that when Tony Blair became the Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair of the Labour Party, I just want to make sure people understand, and you compare him to David Cameron, who came later as a leader of the Conservative Party, there was not much difference in the way they treated Israel. And that was a great success for the lobby, namely mainstream labor politics and mainstream conservative politics were very loyal to the pro-Israeli position. And that was the result of the fact that the lobby in Britain was almost 100 years old. So it's still not easy to understand because you don't expect all these people to be heartless, uh, ignorant, and so on. But it does seem, and I write about it as well. I say it's a bit about the essence of politics in the end of the last century, in this century, which I hope your movement will change, at least in France, if not in the world. The essence of politics was that politicians became self-centered and much less interested in moral values, didn't have really important programs to solve the real concerns of people. And therefore they take a very kind of indifferent approach to problems of other people, definitely if they're not their own people, and if definitely these people cannot impact their re-election. And I think that is something that you cannot credit it to the lobby alone. This has a lot to do with the very poor quality of politics we have in the West, especially in the last 25 years.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would say, yeah, especially in the US and in the UK, where
Right.
just financing electoral campaigns has become such a key part also of politics. And yeah, also in this respect, in one of the final chapters, you mentioned how, especially after the kind of Corbyn affair, now some lobbies have tried basically to help some local candidates, but they wrote about some 10 pledges about Israel. They were kind of suggested to respect. Can you expand a bit more on that? Like,
Yeah. If you want it, if you want to kind of concise the 10 pledges, it really means that unless you are totally loyal to any
yeah.
given Israeli government, not to the state of Israel
Mhm.
only, to any given Israeli government, and you accept the Israeli, and that's the main thing that the 10 pledges do. They claim that only Israel knows what is best for Israel.
Mhm.
Secondly, only Israel knows what is best for the Palestinians. And only Israelis understand the very complex, I say it cynically, the very complex reality on the ground. And therefore, actually, your position towards Israel should be based on this trust, on this confidence.
Mhm.
You are allowed to criticize an action here or a question there, but more or less you have to consult the Israelis before you do it. Kind of get a green light from the Israelis before criticizing them. Um, the language claims that this is just to fight anti-Semitism, but it's very clear that this is to make sure that the message to politicians is that if you are criticizing Israel, you will immediately be condemned as anti-Semitic. Um, it was very shameful to see the, Keith Starmer and the people who replaced Jeremy Corbyn, how easily they accepted these pledges. Uh, and it's a shameful chapter in the history of the Labour Party. I hope one day they will come back to it and admit that this was a regretful, to put it mildly, a regretful document.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Okay, so yeah, to touch upon also some potential questions about the future, about how do you see the actions of the pro-Israeli lobby, especially after October 7 and the genocidal actions of Israel. What do you think the ongoing genocide have an impact of the capacity of the pro-Israel lobbying in many Western countries, especially considering that there are a lot of young people who have expressed sympathy for the sufferings of the Palestinians?
Yeah, well, oops, did I lose you? No, I didn't lose you. Okay. I think it will be very difficult for the lobby. Uh,
Mhm.
it is still successful because the political, not because it's effective, but because the political elites in the West are refusing to confront in any courageous way the Israeli actions. And therefore the lobby is not too worried about positions of government. However, I think they begin to realize that this is not a static situation because
Mhm.
of what you mentioned, that so many sections of the global civil society, including the Western civil society, are aware of what's going on and are siding with the Palestinians. I don't remember a moment in history where so many millions of people around the world identified with the Palestinian struggle. And therefore, even from a cynical electoral perspective, the political elites on the West are not entirely sure that this cannot affect them. Unfortunately, this doesn't come out of any compassion for what's happening to the Palestinian or abhorrence of what Israel is doing. I wish that was the main motive of these politicians. I'm generalizing. I'm sure there are exceptions, but by and large, the only thing that these politicians understand is a threat to their political careers, and millions of people who believe in something is a threat if you don't pay attention to them. So we have this, they are now under two pressures. The pressure of the lobby, that they will, that if you don't continue to be pro-Israeli, you are risking your political career. And the pressure from below, that if you continue to be unconditionally supportive of a country, a state that perpetrates a genocide, you're also risking your political career. We saw this debate within the Democratic Party in the United States. It was clear that the Democratic Party was losing the Arab American vote because of the Biden administration policy in the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, the alternative to the Biden administration was not better for America, but God knows if it was worth for the Palestinians. Time will tell. Probably both administrations are not great news for the Palestinians. But I think that this it's an indicator of I think, of a trend, of a certain process. I think we have a bit of an optical illusions. It is now the time of populist leaders. That is true. And we are experiencing the rise of fascism and neo-right parties and ideologies in Europe. That is true. But I do think that the history teaches us two things about populist right-wing politics. A, it's very incompetent in dealing with problems. And secondly, it doesn't stay for very long in power. And therefore, I think we need a wider historical perspective. The problem is we have two clocks. We have a clock of destruction or we are facing two paces. One pace is very quick, the pace of destruction on the ground by Israel against the Palestinians, and a slower pace of change in the global reaction to Israel. And of course, as activists, we like to narrow the difference between the gaps in order to stop the destruction and influence the policies from above that can make a change on the ground, of course. But I think that that's where we are now in that respect, that the short term is very worrying and terrifying and frightening, especially for the Palestinians. But the long term, I think, is more positive for anybody who believes in justice and liberation in Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned so many interesting points, and I would like also to come back to the rise of the far right globally. But before that, since earlier we were talking about how the public opinion, and especially young people, are becoming more and more aware of the sufferings of Palestinians, what would you recommend to Jewish youth who want to express support and sympathy for the Palestinian cause, but are afraid of consequences for their family, relatives, especially when they have a sort of a traditionally pro-Zionist view?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't have to recommend much because quite an important section of the young Jewish generation, especially in the United States, unfortunately less in Britain, have already made the decision to disassociate themselves from Zionism and believe that part of the process that they are undergoing of redefining the Judaism is by siding with the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. But I don't underestimate what you ask. I think it is not easy. I experience it myself as an Israeli Jew when you are kind of challenging the tribe or leave the boundaries of the tribe. Jokingly, I can say losing some of your relatives is never not always a bad thing. Some relatives are good to lose. But of course, it's not a nice feeling. The most important thing is to understand you are not alone. You are actually part of an historical movement of change within the Jewish communities around the world. You are on the right side of history as well. And I think that this will become more widespread. And the more widespread it is, it would be easier to be resilient once you make this decision, because it's based on your moral values, both as a human being and as a Jew. And I think this is something that will develop. But definitely, I fully understand the dangers, the inconvenience. It's not a nice moment in your life. I can tell it from personal experience. But at the end of the day, I can say after so many years, 70 years old, it pays. It pays. It is rewarding. You feel at peace with yourself. You know you did the right thing, and you don't look back or regret that kind of clear position on Zionism, on Judaism, on the Palestinian issue.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. I think in previous interviews, you also declare that you have been treated as a sort of self-hating Jew, if I correctly recall.
Yeah, that's what they do for Jews. Yeah.
Yeah, and this also shows, I mean, a lot of like divisions in the Jewish community. I also think like, I mean, in France, in the UK, there are some kind of Jewish association who have tried to raise awareness about Palestine, and sometimes they are, kind of labeled by other Jewish association of expressing some sympathy towards, terrorist movements and political extremism. Okay, and speaking again about the far right, because you mentioned it earlier, how would you judge what we have seen in the last years, especially when we see that many far right parties try to sanitize their image by expressing support for Israel and trying thus to, clean their past from their anti-Semitism? And again, I think especially in the case of France about the National Rally, because very recently we saw a visit of Jordan Bardella and Marion Maréchal to Israel. So what do you think about this kind of...
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's an historical explanation here. There's an unholy alliance by anti-Semitic right-wing movements that don't want to see the Jews in Europe, and Zionism that also didn't want to see the Jews in Europe. Of course, for different reasons. I'm not saying that they have the same motives, but in the end of the day, it's an unholy alliance. Secondly, I think that because Europe did not deal with the racism against Jews during the Second World War, it never really dealt with it properly. It was much easier to say, oh, the solution for the anti-Semitism that led to the genocide of Jews during the Holocaust, the best solution is to move the Jews out of Europe and create a Jewish state in Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians. And because racism was not uprooted and was not dealt properly, it remained. Racism in general, not just racism against Jews. And it is very convenient for these movements to learn that Israel became a racist state, very much a right-wing racist state. So there is an ideological affinity which is beyond this coincidental alliance, because people didn't want Jews in Europe and Zionism wanted to bring Jews to Palestine. That's much beyond it. There was no ideological affinity between the right wing and Zionism at the beginning of the road. As we said, it was much more connected to the left. But nowadays, because the way Zionism developed in Israel became a messianic right-wing ideology, it is very much in line of the right-wing ideology of many parties, including in France. And this, there is a kind of a similar image of who is an Arab in Israel and who is a non-French Arab or a Muslim in France. So it's almost like, as you rightly say, it's the sort of cleansing the right wing for its collaboration with the Nazis and the fascists in the past by claiming that they are now the allies of the country that is, or the state that is recognized internationally as representing the victims of the Holocaust. That is that was the right and just response to Nazism. So they say, what do you want from us? We are far more pro-Israelis than you are, you know. But of course, the reason is similar racist typologies, ideologies, Islamophobic, mainly Islamophobic. And what is incredible that some academics in Europe are falling into this trap. I mean, they're willing to discuss with Israelis the problem of immigrants from the Arab world or the Muslim world in France with the problem that Israel has with the Palestinians. Sort of seeing the Palestinians as Arab immigrants that came to Israel, like Arab and North African immigrants that came to France. This is quite incredible if you think about it. Of course, in both cases, it's motivated by racism, but it shows you this kind of attempt to accept Israel as the last bastion against barbarism. The clash of civilization ideologies that people like Samuel Huntington have developed, and at the same time, absolutely you're right to rewrite history of the right wing, and especially the extreme right wing, and its role in the Second World War, and use actually each side wants to use the other. I mean, Israel has very little friends now among conscientious people, or people with a modicum of honesty in them. So they will take anyone as a new friend. And the right wing sees Israel as an important ally to show that they are, part of the civilization, and not what they really are, fanatic, racist political movements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as we know, and as you write in the book, this trend has also intensified after the war on terror, and when Israel was considered again as a bulk of like the Judeo-Christian civilization. So now another question specifically about Israeli and Palestinian politics, especially regarding, how do you see the future of Israeli politics after the mainstreaming of far-right parties in Israel? And again, I think specifically, to, for instance, the party of Smotrich or Ben Gvir, despite the latter, I think he left the government like a couple of months ago. And also, what do you think about a potential one binational state solution?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we see in Israel is a process that began already in the beginning of this century, but particularly was accelerated after the 2022 national elections in Israel. In several places, I compared the two camps in Israel to something which I call the state of Israel against the state of Judea. The state of Israel is the old Israel. That was very racist towards the Palestinians and committed quite awful crimes against the Palestinians. But as far as the Jewish community, it tried to maintain a liberal democratic nature, at least of the Jewish society, very secular as well. And in the 21st century, especially in the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, but also in the more deprived areas of Israel, where mostly second and third generation of North African Jews live, a new kind of messianic ideology developed that at first the secular Israelis treated it as marginal, unimportant, until they got up, wake up one morning to describe that this is the dominant ideological force in Israel. And that state of Judea it also regards the secular Israelis as enemy, not just the Palestinians. And they are dreaming of a theocracy that would stretch over all historical Palestine, probably beyond historical Palestine, because they want to resurrect the ancient state kingdom of Israel they read about in the Old Testament. That's the way Israel is going. I mean, it's going towards a far more fascist, less democratic for Jews. It was never democratic for Palestinians. Less democratic state for the Jews as well. Very aggressive towards the Palestinians and its neighbors. Willing to engage endlessly in military confrontation, whether in order to oppress the Palestinians or to take over parts of the Arab world that it's interested in. As you can imagine, this is not going to work. But while attempting to do it, they can cause a lot of death, bloodshed, and carnage, which is very worrying. The other Israel is caving in, is losing. They're fighting back, some of them, but I don't think they have much of a chance. And quite a few of them have left Israel because the more secular Jews have dual nationalities, they have jobs that they can reignite outside of Israel. And on top of it, you have, of course, Netanyahu, an opportunist politician who goes with what he thinks, and he's right, are the most important mood in the country, both before the 7th of October and especially after the 7th of October. But even if he falls politically, the most important factor is not him. The most important factor is this, what I call the state of Judea ideology. Whoever will replace him would be very loyal to that ideology, because that's the only way to remain in power in Israel nowadays. So it's very worrying. It is good news because in the end of the day, it will not work. And with other processes, I believe it will bring to the end of the Zionist project. And I hope the Palestinian National Movement by then would get its act together, because we need a good liberation movement to fill the vacuum that the disintegration of ideological movement or a regime will create.
Mm-hmm. And so, in this respect, do you think that a sort of one binational state in the future?
Oh, yeah, you're asking about the one state. And I'm not a great believer in binational states when you decolonize a settler colonial state. I don't think a binational state is the solution. I think a democratic state all over Palestine, based on equality of the individuals, on the one hand, and on what we call in international law transitional justice,
Yeah.
or restorative justice, namely that you are correcting things you can still correct of the crimes committed in the past, and you make sure that they are not committed anymore in the future. I think this vision of a free Palestine for all, from the river to the sea, that also enables the return of the Palestinian refugees, is the only possible solution, or the only way to reconcile the needs of the millions of Jewish citizens of Israel and the needs of the indigenous native population of Palestine. It would be very difficult to build it. It would have a lot of teething problem. It will not be a walk in the park. Decolonization is not a nice thing, as we know from history. It's quite nasty. But we'll have to undergo this in order that at least, if not the next generation, the generation after, would have a chance in living differently. But I think it will happen sooner than later than most of us think. And the only way of building it is through this idea of a democratic state for all. I think that's very important. Now, of course, collective identity and ethno-cultural identity of the Jews is something that I think, will become more realistic when the whole political system around Palestine will also change. In Syria, in Iraq, and so on, I think there is a chance that the political system will go back, in fact, to some of the structure that existed before the arrival of imperialism and Zionism, that respected group identities, but did not give any group power over the state. And states were more loose and federated. And therefore, I think that you cannot distinguish between the processes that might happen in Palestine itself and Israel on the one hand, and those happening in the countries around them.
Okay, thank you for covering the answer with so many interesting points. I just want to ask another question about the future of the region, a question that was asked in the chat. So, what is going to happen when the Palestine region will become hard to live on because of droughts and climate change?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, it's very difficult to predict how much this can be a factor, because looking at it from a different point of view, who can challenge in an efficient way this global warming? Not only in Palestine and Israel. And it's connected. I mean, there's an interesting connection between the failure of the international justice system to deal with the question of Gaza and the question of global warming that I don't think many people are thinking about. And the connection is the following. If there was any moment in history where the international system that the West has built after the Second World War in order to prevent the Third World War, the whole international legal system, if there was a moment where it could shine through in a convincing way and persuading people, especially in the global South, that it is indeed a universal system, that it is not only directed against dictators in the global South, but that also people who are in the global West or the global North can be, come under scrutiny of international legal systems. This was the case of Israel, and what it did in Gaza, and it totally failed. The international legal system totally failed. In fact, it is in a crisis that will take it years to rebuild. Now, without international legal system that is effective, you cannot deal with challenges such as global warming, because global warming cannot be dealt by one country. It needs global cooperation, and there cannot be a global cooperation without a valid and respectful international system. So I think that the impact of this global warming on the Middle East as a whole and on Palestine and Israel depends very much on the impact of this process on the world at large. I mean, or put differently, if politics would change in a way that it should change in order for the world to collaborate in facing global warming, which is possible, and dealing with poverty as well, and immigration and so on, then of course it will have less impact on Palestine, which kind of creates a formula here. The more people are winning in struggling against injustices in their countries, injustices that are built on immorality and disparity and so on, the better chances are for a free Palestine. The more politics fail to deal with these issues, the more Israel would enjoy immunity for its policies. So that it's all interconnected to my mind, but definitely it would be a huge challenge for everyone, not just in Israel and Palestine or the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, speaking about politics and international attempts to recognize Palestine, what do you think about Macron's last declaration? Macron said that they will try to recognize Palestine, I think, in next summer. And do you think this would work without joining the Hague group?
Yeah, well, I must say, like many Palestinian friends of mine, before 7th of October, when the Palestinian Authority were going around the world trying to convince countries to recognize Palestine, we were a bit skeptical, because we thought this kind of recognition is recognizing the small Bantustan that the PA had, and that would not be a great victory for the freedom and the end of occupation or colonization. I think after the 7th of October, any recognition of Palestine is, to my mind, in the eyes of many Palestinians and many supporters of the Palestinians, it's not recognizing the small Bantustan in Ramallah. It is recognizing the idea of Palestine. And why is it important? Because part of what this state of Judea, as I called it, is trying to do since the 7th of October is to use it, whatever the Hamas did and the Israeli reaction to it, to use it as an opportunity to wipe out Palestine as an idea, as a country, as a people, believing that they can even convince some Arab leaders to normalize this total disappearance of the Palestinians. So any recognition of Palestine, as symbolic as it is, and as it doesn't have that much effect on the ground, is important in the struggle against the denialism, the attempt to deny the existence of the Palestinians. That is still a very important part of the Israeli propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, it's 7 p.m. I think you have given us already enough of your time. So, Ilan, thank you so much really for rejoining us today. It has been a massive pleasure for me to talk with you and also to read the book, which I highly recommend to anybody who wants to know more about not only lobbying specifically, but also, the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I will now, give the floor back to Clara, I think. Clara will be back just to say a couple of final words.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. There she is.
Hopefully they're not going to be too final. Thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Not surprising, but as usual, good food for thoughts. I'm trying to find a link that's not an Amazon one, but you obviously can buy Ilan's book wherever you want. Please don't buy it on Amazon. I'm sorry, Ilan.
Okay.
If you don't have anyone else selling it, yes, okay, go for it. No, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, especially to Stefan, who's been putting us in touch with you. So that's really appreciated. And thank you to Felix and Najat and Justin and Hugo and everyone who's been involved in this talk. We'll add subtitles as soon as possible. I'm not going to translate that in French because I guess everybody speaks English on this one. And it was a bit messy at the beginning. Apologies. We went to a protest this afternoon for trans rights in the UK that have been severely, again, attacked. Surprise, surprise. Everything is connected. Please share this talk with whoever you think would benefit from learning about the situation and understanding it from a different angle than the one that we see on the media at the moment. I'm going to leave you be and enjoy the rest of the day, the morning, depending on where you are on the planet. You will find in the chat or maybe on screen, actually, a bunch of links goes for some of you who are maybe part of the LFE movement or want to join it. Wherever you are in the world, there are groups on a website called Action Populaire. And you can find a few links on the chat where you can find your local groups and get into it and do whatever you can to share the good word. I'm just saying myself in there, so I'm going to stop rambling. Thank you so much. I think I've forgotten anything extremely important. If I did, we'll put something in the description. Thank you so much for your time again, Ilan.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you so much again.
Rest of the Saturday. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. See you.
Bye.